Hi. I'd like to get started. Thank you very much for making it out today. We had a number of people who registered on Eventbrite and also who found out about us through some of our social media campaign, which is on Facebook and LinkedIn mainly. Can anybody just raise their hand if you're here from finding out about it on Facebook? Okay, great. So we would like to follow up with you. Make sure that you register if you can. We really appreciate the donations that we've got. It helps to defer some of the costs of putting on such an outstanding event as this. I wanted to share with you that Diana is fantastic. She became known to me. I'd seen her on television, where she's with Heritage, but she's also contributed in many other ways. She was with President George W. as well. She's going to say a little bit more about her background. But when I really saw her was when she basically was being grilled, or attempted to be grilled, by Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. And I wanted to share with you, this thing keeps putting on I wanted to share with you just some of the testimony. This is Sheldon Whitehouse talking to Diana Furchtgott-Roth.
Pretty fair summary of the breadth of your testimony across various congressional committees.
Yes, I'm fortunate to have been able to write 6 books on hundreds of articles. I've been Chief Economist of the Labor Department, the equivalent of Chief Economist of the Treasury Department, and Chief of Staff of the Council of Economic Advisors.
Yeah,
so
that's in your resume. And you worked before for the American Petroleum Institute, is that correct?
4 years.
Oh no, we're going to get an ad. Hang with me, guys. We don't have the...
And you worked at the American Enterprise Institute, is that correct?
Yes.
And then the Hudson Institute?
I did work for the Hudson Institute.
And the Manhattan Institute?
Yes.
And now the Heritage Foundation?
Yes.
And every single one of those groups is funded by the fossil fuel industry, is that not true?
Well, unfortunately, I don't have the benefit of being able to rely on the family fortune made in the Minnesota gas. The family fortune come from United Gas. And the Heritage Foundation is a club that anyone can join, not just white people. During 2021, it had hundreds of thousands of individual, foundation, and corporate supporters representing every state in the United States.
Do you know how much funding it received from the oil and gas Baron Koch Industries political operation?
The top 5 corporate givers provided the Heritage Foundation with only 1% of its 2021 income. Individuals contributed 82%, foundations 12%, corporations 1%, program revenue and other income 5%.
Well, the answer is that it's over $5 million from the Koch's various foundations since 1996. From Donors Trust and Donors Capital Fund, which are the great pass-throughs for the fossil fuel industry, to obscure their role, Heritage has received over $2 million. It's received nearly $750,000 from Exxon since 1998. In 2019, Heritage reported on its tax return that its various direct mail, telemarketing, and fundraising efforts were responsible for 19 of the $117 million it received. Can you explain where the other $98 million came from?
As I said, we have hundreds of thousands of individual donors, and I've been writing, as you point out, the same things throughout all my career as a professional economist, beginning in 1985.
Well, I'm going to leave it there, but that's how you impeach somebody's credibility who's trying to attack you. Excellent job, and with that, I'd like to introduce Diana Furchtgott-Roth. Can you use a microphone or not?
Great, well, can everybody hear me? Well, anyway, it's great to be here. I want to thank Brad for inviting me, and I want to thank all of you for coming. It's really great to be here. And you've heard Senator Whitehouse give all my complete resume, so I don't have to say anything else. I had the honor of serving in the White House under Presidents Reagan, George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, and then I was in the Trump administration in the Treasury and the Transportation Departments. So almost all my work has been in economics, and energy is of particular interest, especially given what's going on today. So I want to start out by asking all of you, how many of you traded your pickup trucks for the Ford F-150 Lightning pickup truck? No. Well, there's a reason for that. These EVs do not work as well. They cost more. They don't work in cold climates. They don't fit large numbers of children, and they make us dependent on China. But what's really amazing is that President Biden has declared a war on fossil fuels. And the biggest change, if we had a Republican president rather than a Democratic president, is that there would be a really big change in the nation's energy policy. And when Trump was president, there was a large amount of GDP growth that came from energy. And it would be the same thing if he were reelected. Well, I'm at the Heritage Foundation now. I direct the Center for Energy, Climate, and Environment that was set up about a year and a half ago by our new president, Kevin Roberts. And we've had people come from all kinds of companies and embassies in Washington, D.C., and visitors from other countries asking us what President Trump would do if he were elected in terms of energy policy. You see, we have something called Project 2025 at the Heritage Foundation. It's run by Heritage, but includes 100 other conservative organizations. And we're putting together policies, personnel, executive orders, and notices of proposed rulemaking, proposed rules for a new administration. And people come and they say, well, would President Trump really increase oil drilling? I mean, he's campaigned on a platform of doing it. But people in other countries think it's just amazing that he would do as he says in his speeches and increase production of oil. Well, President Biden's war on fossil fuels had 3 different elements. And President Trump would be able to unwind that using the same 3 elements. So first of all, there was executive orders, things you could just do with a stroke of a pen. And then there was notices of regulations and new regulations. Those took a little bit more time. And then the third was changes in the law. And a new Republican president, if elected, would try to unwind all those using the same kinds of things, because they're all very damaging to the economy. Now, the Greens in the Democratic Party right now, and I would say that right now, the Democratic Party is divided into the Greens and the Blues. And the Greens are the progressives that want to make energy more expensive. They want to do away with fossil fuels. They don't mind if electricity is more expensive. They don't mind if these cars are more expensive. Then there's the blue-collar workers who need the energy for their jobs. They don't want to have all the energy-intensive jobs moved out to China. So there's this schism, and right now, unfortunately, in the Democratic Party, the Greens are winning. So as a result, on day 1, President Biden had a sweeping executive order that expanded the monuments, national monuments, meaning you couldn't have federal oil leasing on it, banned offshore drilling, did away with the Keystone XL pipeline, which probably wouldn't come back, did other things. Anyone can look at this executive order. This is the kind of thing that President Trump could roll back with another executive order. For example, using the same kind of power, 3 weeks ago, President Biden ended liquid natural gas export terminals, new exports of liquid natural gas, which makes absolutely no sense at all, because our allies in Europe who are suffering from a lack of gas because Russia is not exporting gas are going to have to use coal. So it increases the emissions. But it makes no sense. President Biden did it anyway, because of the green progressives who basically have the upper hand at the White House now. They were annoyed about the Willow Creek development in Alaska, the oil project that President Biden approved. So he gave them this, cutting off the exports of LNG in order to make up for it. And his climate czar in the White House is John Podesta, who used to be president of the Center for American Progress, the left-wing, major left-wing Democratic think tank. So there's the executive orders that could be rolled back. Then there's regulations. And at Heritage, we are pro-choice. We think you should be able to buy an electric vehicle, a natural gas vehicle, an electric stove, a natural gas stove, a dishwasher that uses a lot of water, a dishwasher that uses a little water, a water heater that's electric or a water heater that's gas. But the other side, they just want you, they're just pro-choice in one way, and all of you know what that one way is. But President Trump will try and unwind all these mandated appliances. The EV rules, the rules from the Energy Department saying you couldn't buy a natural gas stove, the rules from the Securities and Exchange Commission saying that companies have to look at the climate effects of their actions and the climate effects of their subcontractors. The climate czar at the Office of the Control of the Currency that says that banks should not lend for projects that have climate impacts. And by the way, you might want to know that the climate czar at the Office of the Control of the Currency is Yui Chen, a Chinese native who got her degree from Tsinghua University. You should remember that because China's going to come into this later. But these regulations can be unwound using the same method, two methods actually. First of all, there's going to be judicial challenges. So President Trump could say, we're just going to accept the challenge and we're not going to fight the challenge. Or a new rule could be put in place with a comment period where the public gets to comment on the proposed rule, and then the final rule is issued after incorporating public comments. Then there's the aspect of laws like the infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act that gave $1 trillion to green energy tax credits. That kind of thing has to be unwound through Congress. It can only be passed as a clean bill if there's a Republican House and a Republican Senate. And Washington is so difficult to deal with. Congress is so difficult to deal with that if you bet against anything passing, you are more likely to be right than if you bet that anything will pass. And you might recall that President Trump campaigned in 2016 in terms of getting rid of the Affordable Care Act. And guess what? The Affordable Care Act is still there. It's very hard to get rid of something, but he managed to defang the Affordable Care Act by getting rid of the mandates. So at least you don't have a fine if you don't sign up for health insurance now. And it could be the same with the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits. I'm not sure how many of you know, but taxes are going to go up in 2025 if Congress does nothing. So there's going to be a big hunt for revenue to keep taxes the way they are now if President Trump gets elected. President Biden is, on the other hand, campaigning to raise taxes. But if President Trump's elected, it's possible that the unused Inflation Reduction Act energy tax credits could be rolled over into a new set of taxes to keep our current tax rates the way they are. So President Trump will try to roll back all these kinds of things. Well, we have visitors to the Heritage Foundation from all these different countries, and they say, doesn't President Trump care about clean air? Well, of course he cares about clean air. All of us care very much about clean air. And over the past 15 years, carbon emissions in the United States have gone down by 1,000 million metric tons. But carbon emissions in China have gone up by 5,000 million metric tons. If we really care about global emissions, it makes no sense to make very strict rules in the United States, which result in energy-intensive manufacturing emptying out and going places like China and India, where they are made in dirtier ways. And it's the same with Western Europe. The NetZero agenda is deindustrialization, it's degrowth. It hurts poor people the most because they lose their jobs. And it doesn't result in lower carbon emissions. Because if you have China, which is building 2 new coal-fired power plants every week, making the same products that were made in the United States, this is not helping the climate. So the way to help the climate, the way to reduce emissions, if we want to reduce emissions, is to increase exports of LNG and also increase exports of our nuclear technology, nuclear power technology, so there can be more nuclear power, which is emissions free. We need dense, emissions-free energy if we are going to be lowering emissions. It doesn't help just to take American products and ship them overseas. We also don't want to be giving the advantage to China, because wind turbines, solar panels, they're made in China. 80% of batteries for electric vehicles are made in China. 60% of critical minerals are controlled by China. And if anything, if we've learned anything over the past 3 years with Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the cutoff of natural gas to Europe, it's that we need to be self-sufficient in energy, or at least not depend on countries that are not friendly to us. We are so fortunate to have these large reserves of oil and natural gas. I mean, there was the Energy Policy Act of 1975, where America tried to be independent. We didn't know we had all this oil and natural gas. Well, now we have it. And there's no point in trying to build wind and solar, which makes us dependent on other countries, unless it makes economic sense. At the Heritage Foundation, we're in favor of taking away all the subsidies for all kinds of energy and letting the chips fall where they may. I mean, there are states like Kansas that have large amounts of wind, but other states, it is far more difficult to do the backup. And it's more expensive. All of you might have noticed that your electricity bills are going up. That's because providing intermittent energy, in other words, wind when it blows, backed up with natural gas when the wind doesn't blow, or when the sun shines using the solar panels and using a natural gas power plant when it doesn't. That's more expensive than using one natural gas power plant that would run continuously. So basically, it's a religion among people to use these different kinds of things. And it's causing recessions in different parts of the world. It's causing political instability. In about a dozen countries in Europe, farmers are rioting because they're being told they can only have 2 animals per hectare, because these animals have methane emissions, their own methane emissions, and the green crowd does not like them. They also don't want fertilizers, artificial fertilizers, which are essential to farming. So energy security means food security, and these farmers are quite naturally upset, and political parties that are very right-wing are in the ascendancy. I think it's important also to look at the morality of saying to these other countries in Africa, Latin America, that they should not be using fossil fuels. The World Bank, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, does not lend for fossil fuel or nuclear projects in emerging economies. And there's 3 to 6 billion people in these countries that do not have electricity or water. We cannot be saying to them, we have our standard of living, we use fossil fuels, but we're going to say that you have to use renewables instead, because they're never going to be able to get to our standard of living. And all of us are concerned about people pouring across the border. Well, one reason is that those countries are poor and our country is rich. Our country is rich because we've used fossil fuels. We got to let them be rich too by using fossil fuels. And then a lot of them, I'm sure, will be a lot happier living in the countries where they are born, if there's strong manufacturing sectors, strong jobs. And we've seen increasingly how lack of energy can destroy a country. Just take 2 examples. Venezuela used to be one of the main richest countries in Latin America, and it's been totally destroyed, even though it has a lot of natural resources. South Africa used to, again, be one of the gems of the African continent. Now, Eskom, its utility, tells people on an app how many hours they will not have electricity a day. 2 hours or 4 hours. It's called load shedding in South Africa. That means if you're a small businessman and you need to keep your food fresh because you have a store, all of a sudden your refrigeration goes down. You have to sell it at cutthroat prices because it's going to go bad afterwards. It means if you have children that need to do homework, they don't have any light. There's no light, there's no computer. use when there's load shedding. So it basically destroys a country, and we cannot be saying to countries in Africa and Latin America that they cannot achieve our standards of living. So with that, I just want to stop and open it to questions and discussion. I'd be happy to take any of your questions, especially questions where you all disagree with me. I want to hear about it. So why don't you raise your hands and I can call them. Yes.
I guess I'm going to start up with one that disagrees with you a little.
Sure.
In your response to people who come to the Heritage and say, doesn't Trump care about clean air?
Yeah.
Or doesn't America care about clean air? Well, first of all, we probably have the toughest SO2, particulate matter, ozone standards in the world. And CO2 does not contribute to dirty air.
Mm-hmm.
It contributes to a more carbon dioxide enriched air, which is great for plant life, for trees, for shrubbery, for everything that's green, in fact. I have no idea why they call that the green. We who love carbon dioxide should be called the green. So it's the language. I think we have to stop buying into their premises that carbon dioxide contributes to dirty air. It does not. This would be a very dirty air room because we're all sitting here exhaling carbon dioxide.
Right.
So I just think the language, we have to stop them in their tracks.
Yeah.
Not buy their premises.
Right. No, you are absolutely right. It's the carbon emissions that they see as being harmful because it destroys, they say, destroys the planet in the future.
And it's another one, I think, called carbon dioxide emissions. Carbon and carbon dioxide are two different things. We don't emit carbon.
Exactly.
We emit carbon dioxide.
Right. But even if we were to get rid of all fossil fuels right now in the United States, it would only make a difference of 0.2 of 1 degree centigrade by the year 2100. And for Europe, if Europe did the same thing, it would be a difference of 0.13 degrees. So together, it's a difference of 3.3 tenths of, basically 0.3 of 1 degree centigrade by the year 2100, because these other countries around the world, no one else is cutting back. So it doesn't make any difference. And it doesn't have any effect on the climate. So the argument is that the carbon goes into the air and that it creates a barrier. So climate, I believe, is a future risk to be managed, but we have poverty with us right now. We need to be dealing with the poverty right now, and that means we need to focus on low electricity bills. We need to give access to fossil fuels to people who do not have it so that they can raise their standards of living. Yes?
Do you tell people, I'm asking you, do you tell people that wind and solar cannot produce a single molecule of plastic, but they consume huge amounts of plastic that can only come from fossil fuels?
I do tell them that, that one reason net zero 2050 is impossible is that even if we had all wind turbines in the United States, you still need fossil fuels to make the wind turbines. I mean, they're made of steel, they're made of cement, they're very, very difficult to make, and plastic. Yeah, they're very difficult. They're very, very difficult to make and to transport and to mend, by the way.
And solar panels as well.
Yeah, and solar panels as well. And we have just wonderful technology here in the United States with our natural gas-fired power plants and our coal-fired power plants and nuclear power plants. One of my team is writing a book called Going Nuclear, which is going to be published in October, about what regulations we can change in order to enable the growth of nuclear power. Yes?
Could you make comments on the future of hydrogen?
At Heritage, we believe on having everything on an equal playing field. So if hydrogen can manage on an equal playing field, we are in favor of hydrogen. We're not in favor of picking any technologies or giving subsidies to technologies.
Do you think it's a possibility of the future?
Right now, it seems like it uses more energy to make hydrogen than hydrogen actually gives off. But, technology changes. No one knows what's going to happen with the advance of technology. I mean, 30 years ago, no one could have foretold this smartphone here that's probably recording me and all the other smartphones around the room. So no one knows what's going to happen.
Because I'm very much interested in nuclear power, and papers have been written where nuclear is very important for the daytime manufacturing, that at night, they're using it for electrolysis of splitting hydrogen and oxygen molecule
Yeah.
when they're off season, when they're off peak.
Yeah.
And that's a very efficient way of doing it.
Right, right. Well, if there is an efficient and a good way of doing something, I know that our innovators here in the United States and elsewhere are going to figure it out. I just don't think that government money should be spent on these kinds of things. Yes.
So I don't remember the last time a nuclear plant was built in the U.S.
I think it was the wasn't there one in Savannah, Georgia, the latest one?
Global one and two.
Global 1 and 2 in Georgia.
Right, as
Yeah.
opposed to, I think, France, it seems like they open one up every month or something. But the role of nuclear energy going forward, the fears that prevented the building on that, I think the technology, do you believe, is at the point where we could turn to that and use that more so to offset some of these concerns about the effects of fossil fuel use?
Nuclear power is safe. There haven't been any accidents in France. France produces about 60%, 50 or 60% of its electricity with nuclear power. There wasn't anyone killed at 3 Mile Island. There wasn't anyone killed at Fukushima. There were deaths at Chernobyl, but that was very old technology, and the Russians were not very efficient at dealing with that particular case. But just as when, if you have a car accident, and by the way, there's 40,000 people killed on the roads every year. When there's a car accident, you don't ban cars. If there's a problem in a nuclear plant, and I would say that the problems have been relatively small compared with the amount of energy that these plants emit, you don't stop that kind of technology.
So why don't we build more, or some?
Well, that's a question. My colleague Jack Spencer says that there's a lot of regulations that prevent these nuclear power plants from being built. He's writing a book about it, and I can put you in touch with him and he can give you a lot more detailed information. But he thinks that if there were regulatory fixes, there would be more nuclear power plants, both in the United States and around the world. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit on the subject of nuclear, the thorium salt technology, which is safer than the GE technology that was developed back in the 50s and 60s? Why has the thorium technology not been funded in this country?
I'm an economist, not a physicist, and I understand that the thorium technology has several advantages, but I cannot talk really about the advantages of one rather than the other. But if you give me your card afterwards, I can connect you with Jack Spencer, my colleague who works on nuclear. Yes.
First, I'd like to make a comment on this gentleman here. I'm a former nuclear machinist in the U.S. Navy, and the reliability and guaranteed performance of pressurized water reactors has been proven through decades of use around the world. So alternatives will need to prove themselves. If they have advantages, then building one or two and testing them out, verifying that they work, would be good. My question for you starts off with a little bit of history. In 1970, I learned about the LaPorte weather anomaly, where in LaPorte, Indiana, it would routinely get a lot more thunderstorms per year, and that was attributed to industrial discharges from smokestacks to the east. Now, I never heard anything about that after the 70s, but I have not heard that there is any definitive, conclusive study that shows that man's activities have altered the climate. So, are there any? And if there aren't any, why don't we point that out to these environmentalists?
Well, we're certainly trying to point it out to environmentalists. So at Heritage, we have a climate science advisory group that's writing a series of papers. The first one was published last month, showing how the models from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change did not predict correctly. There's also Al Gore's movie, An Inconvenient Truth, which shows that Manhattan should be underwater now if he were correct. Today, in fact, a paper was published on causes of sea level rise. People attribute sea level rise to industrialization, but the sea level has been rising ever since, for the past 20,000 years, ever since the end of the Ice Age. So it's not clear that human activity is linked with these cycles, because you can see warming and cooling cycles pre-industrialization. So we got a group of about six to eight different scientists. They're writing papers on these. They're coming out over this the next 6 months or so. We're going to be publishing them as a book, and they deal with these specific different questions, such as health effects of increased warming. In fact, more people die from cold than warm. So quite a lot of these things are just not true. It's because the green proponents, this is an industrial food fight. It's one industry against another. This is not reason. This is one industry trying to prevail over another for financial reasons, and we shouldn't look on it as a group of reasoned academics. Otherwise, there would be a lot more civil debate, but the other side just doesn't want to debate. I mean, they say to me, well, do you believe the IPCC models? And I say no, and they say, well, you're a climate denier. I say, well, no, the models just don't predict. They basically don't want to discuss it. They also don't want to discuss the case of dealing with a future possible risk of climate change versus the current problem of poverty now as we know it. And the people at the Center for American Progress say quite openly they would rather deal with the future climate risk than with poor people right now, which is really a sorry thing for a Democrat think tank, which purports to represent poor people, to say. Yes?
But a fun fact, I was talking to my daughter, who's now 36 years old, and I had no idea. She said, well, you know, they used to show us an inconvenient truth every month through my entire high school.
Huh.
And I had no idea.
Yeah,
Because
no,
I
they
stayed
do.
in Texas.
Right, I know.
So it's
Yeah.
going on everywhere. They brainwashed our kids. And
Yeah. Well, when I was in middle school, they were talking about nuclear winter. And the solutions for nuclear winter were have fewer children, drive less, use electricity. Then they switched to global warming. That was the same solutions. Climate change, same solutions. So there's obviously a group of people that just wants us to drive less, use electricity, and less electricity, and have fewer children. And they're applying this to everything. So given that I lived through the nuclear winter scare, I couldn't really take the global warming scare very seriously. Let's get one question over here, and then you. Yeah.
I work a lot with Terry local government, and believe it or not, there's a whole 2050 plan locally. What are some things that we can do to influence our environmental committee, our town council, to help them understand that this is actually affecting affordable housing right here?
You should point out that this is going to result in just ask if they've estimated the higher costs of electricity. And also there's damage you need increased transmission lines. We need a lot more electricity to go to these 2050 goals. And these transmission lines have been shown to cause wildfires. The latest fire in Texas was caused by these transmission lines. So I think that you need to get a lot of people coming to the meetings and just showing the negative effects. And also, we can estimate, by the way, the effect on global temperatures in the year 2100 if North Carolina stuck to 2050 goals. I mean, it's just infinitesimal. It's 0.0000 something. Because the New Jersey people asked us for that because they were trying to fight offshore wind. And so we showed how it would make no difference in global temperatures. And the people who wanted to have these offshore wind turbines, we looked at the environmental impact statements, and they asked for permission to hurt a certain number of sea mammals, about 20 whales and 50 gray seals and porpoises and dolphins, and people don't like that either, as well as they don't like the look of the wind turbines. So I think you need a lot of people just to be active and say we don't need higher electricity bills. We don't need a greater chance of wildfires. And this isn't going to help the climate, so all this is for nothing.
One of the biggest problems is communicating your conservative ideas to the whole populace. As you know, the media is all on one side, And the trouble with other media, radio, television, newspapers, either they're giving our point of view or they're giving the left side of view, point of view, and therefore there's no spreading of our information. Is somebody in your organization working on somehow to spread it to other people?
We do have media and digital teams, and we try and look at the effects on poor people. So we talk about how if there's mandatory EVs, poor people wouldn't be able to get to their jobs, they wouldn't be able to get to school. Have you ever looked at the kind of cars that are parked around construction sites? I mean, these are battered old cars. These are not new Teslas. And if we mandated these EVs, people wouldn't be able to get to their jobs. It's not social justice to make people's electricity bills more expensive and take away their means of transportation so they can't get to work and they can't get to school. Yes?
So Diana, this makes me think that this, of course, is just one of the prongs in the left's essentially attack on our country and the way we live. And basically, I mean, can you talk a little bit about what you understand to be the philosophical underpinnings of what is going on and what we're seeing just across the board, not just in energy and environment, but in immigration. And I mean, now we see the defense budget's been cut. There's so many different areas, it's hard to even know where to start.
Yeah.
I mean, aren't we really talking about a philosophical attack?
We really are, Brad, and we're really talking about a change in the method of production, which as an economist I find very troubling. So socialism was a change in the ownership of production, but this is a change not just in the ownership, but in the means of production, saying that we cannot use the most efficient means of production. And that's basically crippling the United States. It's not America first, it's America last. That's the same as people coming across the border. So people coming across the border, again, just opening up our country, and it's not people who are necessarily in need of political asylum. It's, as I was saying before, people who want better lives, and then we don't let them have the means to create the economically rich lives that they want, because we don't let them have the energy that's necessary. We have Chinese and Iranians coming through Panama and then coming out to the United States. It's very dangerous. And then, as you said, the decline in the military budget, the decline in the US Navy. It's an America last agenda in all kinds of ways, including, by the way, the destruction of the family, the focus on transgender, allowing men who say they're women to compete in women's sports so that the women don't get to win anything anymore. So all this is just trying to take apart the fabric of American society, and I think that that's one reason that President Trump is so popular, why he gets so many people at his rallies, because people, normal people like you and me, we can just see that this is happening. And these are the kinds of people that go to his rallies because they want to change and they're tired of it. Is there anyone who hasn't asked a question who wants to ask one? Yes, you, and then we'll go to you.
This isn't really a question, but I saw a picture and I was trying to find it on my phone. There's a plan to build a plane that's as long as a football field. That's enormous.
Yeah.
Have you seen the picture?
To carry wind turbines.
I'm sorry?
To carry wind turbines.
Carry wind turbines.
Right. To carry.
And we'd lose all that if you stopped wind turbines. Wouldn't that be a tragedy?
Yeah, no, it's again something that is too costly that no businessman would choose if it was his own business to run, but it's only because it's taxpayer subsidized that these types of energy are coming up. And over the past 20 years throughout the globe, countries have spent $9 trillion on subsidies for clean energy. And each time they say, well, it's just for another 1 or 2 years, then they can stand on their own. But they can never stand on their own. And they're also very environmentally destructive. To get enough minerals, critical minerals for one electric battery, you need to move 500,000 pounds of earth. And these mines, the US government won't allow them in the United States. There's good supplies of critical minerals here in the United States, but they're not allowed to be mined because of the environmental degradation of the mining. But apparently it's okay to mine them in Democratic Republic of the Congo, where children go down in the mines, or China, where children go down into the lithium mines, and where there's slave labor in Xinjiang in China that helps make these kinds of things. So this is just being kept afloat by these subsidies. Yes.
Yeah, just
And then
something I've thought about a lot over the years, because dating back to the 1970s, there was a big movement in the country by the left. I remember a congressman named Toby Moffett out of Connecticut, Ted Kennedy, to actually nationalize the oil industry, right? And that was part of it. They wanted to nationalize the oil industry. Well, Reagan came in, that failed, obviously. And then they discovered things like climate change, other reasons. Essentially, the idea being, if we can get, and I think nationalizing the oil industry says a lot, that the group behind that was something called the Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee. They were sort of a wing, far left wing of the Democratic Party. Now they'd be mainstream. But they were behind it. And as the years have gone by, it seems pretty clear that a lot of what's going on stems from that. The idea is that if you can control energy, you don't need to nationalize the economy. That you control the fundamental means of production. Because energy is the input into every single production process in the country. So if you can control that essential ingredient from the top, then you can essentially socialize the economy. And I believe that the facts fit that narrative.
Yeah.
If you look at it
Right.
over the years, that this is really a movement to, and they stopped trying to do it through outright socialism, decided let's do it through fascism, and total government control of how it's produced, what it's produced with, all those kinds of things.
We have 50 different states. We can see what electricity rates are like in California vis-a-vis Texas and different states. We have people moving to states where there's the most efficient means of production. And so that's at least a ray of hope. I certainly remember the gas lines back in the 1970s until Reagan was president. And then he changed the law. He took off the price caps, and the gas lines miraculously disappeared. So people don't like inefficiency, they don't like high prices, and they move to where things are more efficient. There was actually back here, yes.
I have a lot of respect for what you achieved in your life and your career as a woman, and what you've accomplished. I disagree with some of the things you're saying, and I encourage you to talk to people doing the science and to understand that physics doesn't care whether you believe it or not. It's just, it just is.
Right, exactly, yes. No, that's why we're publishing this series of papers by very eminent climate scientists looking at the science, the causes of sea level rise, the models of the IPCC, whether there are more hurricanes now or fewer hurricanes. There are not more hurricanes than there used to be. People say there are, but they are not.
May I finish?
Yeah.
There may not be more hurricanes, but the hurricanes are intensifying. There's a mountain of scientific evidence, and I encourage you all to look it up and read it. And you can Google 2 words, Exxon, K-E-N-E-W, Exxon New, and you'll learn that as far as back as the 1970s and ongoing, research scientists for Exxon knew that burning fossil fuels affects climate, and in the long term it would cause harm. There is a mountain of scientific evidence, even from oil company scientists, showing that burning fossil fuels is a major cause of global heating. You can talk about nuclear solutions, but there's an emerging problem there that as waters warm, it becomes increasingly difficult to cool the plants. Natural gas may be a good short-term bridge solution, but it is not the long-term solution. if you are going to talk about free market solutions, you should probably account for the fact that fossil fuels are subsidized. We do not pay real market prices for them.
Thank you. Do you have a question?
Yes.
What is your question?
The Foundation is partly funded by the Koch family, which owns oil refineries. You say you're in favor of removing subsidies. Are you in favor of removing subsidies from fossil fuels?
The fossil fuel industry does not have very many subsidies, or hardly any subsidies that other manufacturing doesn't have. So when, for example, an oil company drills a well and gets to write off that dry well, it's the same as a pharmaceutical company that invests in a drug and then finds that drug doesn't work and gets to write that off. There used to be percentage depletion and a lot more subsidies for fossil fuels, but those have fallen by the wayside. So yes, I would be in favor of taking away any subsidies for fossil fuels not shared by other domestic manufacturing, not in lines with any other domestic manufacturing. And as for fossil fuels causing harm, they also cause tremendous benefits, advances in prosperity. And we've written a paper about this that came out in January that I'd be happy to send you. Those areas where there's the most human advancement, the best health, those are the ones that use the most fossil fuels. People all over the globe are migrating from areas that have less fossil fuel use to areas that have more fossil fuel use because of the increase and improvement in the quality of life. In fact, one funny story, I am here in the United States because of fossil fuels. My father interviewed for a job in Washington, D.C. from London. He called back to my mother and said, "We have to move to America. In America, they heat the bathrooms." So there's a great deal of, there's comfort in having a higher standard of living for fossil fuels. Did you have a follow-up on that, or not, or a different question?
Yeah, it kind of plays in a bit.
Okay, so one follow-up and then over here.
Yeah, so thanks for coming out and sharing all the knowledge and insights. So I was going to ask this question anyway, but I think it also partially applies to the ladies' comments from the back. So I think it's a noble way of perceiving these problems, because if you look, and I'm going to drive this into a question about economics, when you look at the fundamental beliefs of the United States, it comes from the Declaration of Independence, which begins with life. So for you to couch your belief in a defense of life, I think it's the strongest position you can be in. Now, when it comes to the acts of God and nature killing people through storms or whatever, it's tragic. And I think it's a known unknown. We know it's going to happen. We don't know exactly how it's going to happen, why it's happening, how to control it. When it comes to energy, I think we do know. When I say economics in college, like I got obsessed with this. I really wanted to go work in energy, went a different direction. But I learned that essentially the cost of energy is equal to the cost of food, and I think food is more fundamental to life than natural disaster. So we can have more control over it. So I think there's actually a moral obligation that we have to promote the most materially productive means of energy generation that we have. Because like if you drive up the cost of gas or energy very slightly through regulation, you're condemning a bunch of people to die somewhere in the world because energy is a global market. So do you know of any research around the lives that are the cost of changing the absolute cost of energy on the global market?
We have just written a paper on the contribution of fossil fuel energy to human advancement. And we can see that in areas where the cost of energy is very high and people use less of it, then they have worse health effects and fewer jobs and industry leaves. Just look at the example of Germany that has very high electricity rates right now. A lot of plants like Siemens and BASF are moving to the United States, so those Germans are losing their jobs. It's deindustrialization, degrowth, lower employment, higher unemployment. I believe there was a question over here that I missed. Yes.
My question is, in your role,
yeah,
given your background, which is so diverse, what are your top 2 or 3 objectives what would you like to get accomplished in what you're doing right now with the Heritage Society?
Oh, well, I mean, irrespective of who the president is, I want to see the rules on EVs ended, the rules on different appliances ended. People should have the choice of what appliances they buy. So those would be some of my top choices. And also rolling back the rules saying that states have to have a certain share of their electricity generated by renewables. I mean, I think that we should leave it a much more even market up to consumer choice. The market, Americans clearly don't want to buy the 62% of new vehicles as battery-powered electric that President Biden wants them to, with rules from EPA and rules from DOT. So these rules are just tremendously harmful, very, very harmful. They drive up electricity prices, they hurt farmers, they hurt small businessmen, they hurt poor people, and they should really be eliminated. No matter who the president is. And even President Biden, he's finding that the auto dealers are writing to him saying that these cars are just sitting on the lots, people aren't buying them. So, I mean, it's very difficult to mandate things for sale. You can mandate them, but you can't make people buy them. So it's just wasted subsidies, wasted money. And we have a deficit of around $35 trillion, a debt of $35 trillion right now. And this is one way that one could go to reducing that, getting rid of some of these subsidies. Yes, you, and then over you.
So with nations like China and India and other poor nations creating more dirty energy, have there been any proposals from the Greens and the Democratic Party to impose tariffs or other ways of dissuading countries from purchasing energy or products made with dirty energy from those nations?
Yes, it's called a carbon border adjustment tax. So what they want to do is they want to have a tax on different products coming in on the basis of how much carbon is used to make those products. So if, for example, you have a dishwasher made in China, it would have a different tariff from a dishwasher made in South Korea, which uses a lot of nuclear power. And I think that Europe is imposing some kind of carbon tax. I mean, I think these carbon taxes, again, they're going to raise the prices of products. I think they're very difficult to administer. They're conceivably against WTO rules, because WTO rules says that you should have the same tariff on each type of good, no matter how it was made. So that is one major effort to do that. But, you know, people in Beijing are asking for cleaner air too. The US Embassy put an air tracker on its roof. And this was watched very carefully by residents of Beijing, who then placed political pressure on the people in power to clean up the air. So all countries want cleaner air because people want cleaner air. And so I think that before the Beijing Olympics, China moved some factories out, further out. I mean, there are places in China that are perfectly clean, where there's blue skies in the north and northwest. Yes.
So is one of the assumptions that somehow fossil fuels are going to run out? And is there any truth? I mean, obviously, I guess everything will run out eventually.
I mean, right now they're not saying fossil fuels are going to run out. Right now they're saying fossil fuels are going to damage the climate.
Okay, so but did they, I mean, do they think we should just stop using fossil fuels because, I mean, we're only going to have them for 100 years or something?
Yeah, no, there was a theory called peak oil, that our oil was going to run out, and that this was promulgated by a scientist called King Hubbard, Hubbard. He had a theory of peak oil, which he promulgated in the 1970s and 80s. But the amount of reserves that we have seen of oil and fossil fuels, they are growing, not shrinking. So the peak oil thesis is not true. And environmentalists are using, they say that the use of fossil fuels is harming the planet. They do not say fossil fuels are running out. But of course the Romans were worried copper was running out. But we've always been able to find new technology. Humans are very innovative. Yes?
I'd love to see Heritage take this up. I wrote a piece a long time ago for Bradley's group, and what I argued on subsidies, issue isn't subsidies, but net subsidies. In other words, subsidies minus penalties. The cost of subsidies minus the benefits you get. The benefits you get minus the cost of the penalties. So what you have to look at is the subsidies minus the cost of regulations on that industry. I would think it's not even close. Once you subtract out the cost of regulations on the fossil fuel industry, including the cost of a government telling them they're going to shut them down in a few years, but also restrictions on places to drill, all kinds of restrictions. Once you subtract out the penalties, it's not even close. There are no subsidies. I would guess anything that number would be negative. That in fact, oil is not oil is way overpriced, not underpriced, as was suggested. And that would be the right calculation to make.
Right, yeah. Well, in terms of EVs, car companies had to pay Tesla what they call ZEV credits, zero emission vehicle credits, because it wasn't making enough electric vehicles. So it was paying Tesla, and at one point Tesla was making more money from the ZEV credits than it was from selling the Teslas on its own. It was basically a ZEV credit company. So you had these companies having to pay their competitors because they weren't making enough themselves. So it's a very difficult situation.
Are there any other questions?
I have one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could you comment on national grant subsidies that are provided to scientists and scientific studies that have a predetermined outcome required in the grant applications? That's something that I've read a lot about, and if you only are getting one outcome, you
Right.
can't view the entire picture.
Right, yeah. Well, the U.S. government is a huge grant-making organization in many, many different ways, and the focus changes when there's a new administration. So in my former department, the Transportation Department, the focus changed from innovation, infrastructure, and safety to climate, social justice, and electrification, so that the research grants that were given out reflected the views of the new administration. Similarly, NIH, different kinds of studies there. Congress also states its goals. So there's studies of next-gen fuels, for example, biofuels for the military. We didn't see when in different recent military actions that the Houthis, for example, are using biofuels. They seem to be using regular gasoline, oil-powered fuels. But anyway, there are these studies for our military of these fossil fuels. So it very much depends on the administration. And yes, they do craft the question so that there would be a certain outcome.
So if your grant application has an outcome that is not favorable to the administration's views, they don't get the grant.
Well, you would try to aim it so that you would choose the kind of person that would give you the result you want. Once you've given them the grant money, you wouldn't pull it back.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
But that leaves a lot of grant applications.
Right, yes, it does, yeah.
You have a hard time getting it published.
Right,
That's
yeah.
that too.
yeah. Well, anyway, I want to thank you very much for listening, and I can be reached at the Heritage Foundation. You can Google Heritage Foundation, Diana Furchtgott-Roth. Happy to answer any of your questions. I also have cards with me if you want. And these are very, very exciting issues. Energy is absolutely fundamental to economic growth all over the world. There's no more important subject that we need to be focusing on to get it right. So thank you so much for listening.
Yes, thank you very much for being so gracious as to answer my emails and
Absolutely.
take my calls, and I want to thank you all there very much for coming out, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. We're going to have some more exciting events each month. I want to say a big thank you to Michael Farrell for his help as a membership coordinator. He's been a great right-hand man, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.